Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi.
Hi. So, we're just waiting on Beth joining us, but let me introduce you to Jan, who is a health and safety expert, auditing expert, been with the university a very long time, but also comes from industry. So he's going to be running this morning session. I'm just waiting for Beth joining on us, but maybe Jan can introduce himself while I'm just kind of getting everyone set up.
Yes, I certainly can. It'd be useful though if they were all here, but certainly Jan Miller, I've been with the university for quite a number of years now, but I actually started my life as an engineer. So I was actually an agricultural engineer. So I worked in farms, doing farm work, but also doing construction within the farming and looking after animals. So I've got quite a varied background. Excuse me. I went from there to be a farm manager, taking over a mixed farm of beef, sheep, and pigs. And then I decided to get back to study. I wanted to learn a bit more. And I finished up doing various degrees within other universities and finished up at Paisley when it was Paisley University before it was West of Scotland. And I am programme leader now. Oh, morning, Beth.
Hi, Beth.
Yep.
Hi, morning.
I'm just giving a wee introduction to myself. So I finished up as programme leader for occupational safety and health and programme leader for environmental health with professional practice. So we teach health and safety professionals and environmental health officers to go out and work with local authorities. About 3 years ago, I was actually the programme leader for the programme that Ian runs and Andrew runs, which is a waste and resource management programme. But that was passed on just because of the amount of work it takes to run all programmes. So I have a lot of background in consultancy. I've done a lot of work in Northern Ireland in relation to waste management, pollution control, and looking at the economics within waste management and the best way to recycle, whether it's plastic, paper, cardboard, and all the issues with that. So I've got a varied background. I'm a lead auditor for health and safety and environment. That's not to say that I know everything, so please bear that in mind. If some of you are working in areas where you're doing this all the time, you may have picked up some other information which is really useful and we can share. So the idea of this morning's session is not for me, I'll have slides, but it's mainly I'll bring them up, and if I want to discuss some, I would like to discuss some and discuss your knowledge and experience, what you think, how you think it would fit in. I have some good photographs. And again, we'll discuss same to see how that fits into the overall context of the eCal system that we're doing. Okay, you all happy with that? Brilliant. So I think before we start, it'd be really useful if you could all just come in one at a time and give me just a brief background of your own knowledge and experience, and also how it relates to auditing. If you've done auditing, that'd be really useful to know. So if we start with Rebecca, if that's okay.
Hiya, I'm Principal Environmental Consultant for Fairhurst, which is an engineering firm.
Yes.
So I'm very much a minority because I was the first environmental consultant to start in the engineering firm, and it's dragging them into the 21st century. So I've got a lot of battles.
Yes, I can imagine.
I mainly work on major infrastructure projects at the moment, but got a history in renewables, basically environmental consultancy for renewables, and started off my career at SEPA.
Right,
I did a master's in environmental and water management many years ago, and that sort of started my professional career. In terms of auditing, just really sort of environmental clerks of work stuff. So mostly what I do for work generally is reviewing documents now, and then just picking up, having worked on sites, I'm quite aware of how things need to be written to actually make them relevant and applicable and implied. So I have fun sort of tearing apart documents because I know things that are written aren't necessarily deliverable, where I say, well, how are you actually going to do that? So I kind of audit it from a practicality side, and we talk on the major infrastructure projects, we talk about buildability assessments. So how are you actually going to do that? So I guess that's more where my auditing comes in.
I think that's quite interesting because some of my own background is that although I do a lot of auditing, I have done a lot of construction as well. Now, not major construction. We're talking about maybe farm buildings or conversion of areas into workshops, that type of thing. But you're looking at it and you're saying, well, it's okay what they're saying they're going to do, but how are they actually going to do it? How are they going to implement it in a way
becoming
that's
a bigger thing.
impact? Yeah,
we come across it more and more because I think what my personal observation over the last sort of nearly 15 years I've been working is that there are pre-planning, there are more and more promises in order to get a planning consent, and they can, just as a sweeping observation, they can become more unreal. So, you know, we will ensure this and we will achieve that. And it's like, yes, but how are you going to do that? And
yes.
when you start probing, things often can fall down, you see. So I'm sometimes a thorn in people's sides.
Yeah, and that's the same with every bit of auditing. You know, it's you see the documentation, it looks good, but when you actually start to probe deeper, you find out that people don't quite understand it, or they think they're doing the right thing, but it's not. So that's interesting. Mike.
Hi, how you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Good stuff, good stuff. So I am a senior landscape architect for a French engineering company called Sistra. We mainly work on high-speed rail and large infrastructure projects, linear infrastructure projects. I have a background though in much more diverse. Previously working in renewables, mineral extraction, public realm, as well as sort of highways and rail and all sorts. In terms of auditing, very limited experience really, only just in sort of bits and pieces of Clerk of Works role, particularly to do with landscape works and ecological works. So I'm sort of here to get a grasp on everything else, I suppose.
Good. That's good to know, and hopefully by the end of this you'll get a better understanding of it.
That's the hope, yeah.
We'll see how it goes. I mean, Beth.
Hello.
Hello there.
My background is I studied environmental science at uni, and then I did a master's in environmental consultancy. And I am currently working for Binnie's, which was formerly Black and Veatch, as an environmental scientist. So in a consultancy role. I'm really new to environmental Clerk of Works. It's the role that I'm doing at the moment for a project. Generally a bit of a generalist. I did a lot of sort of soil contamination and things in my degrees. That was my area of interest. But I mainly do like water work now.
Water is one of the major issues we have just about in every site. Land contamination is important, absolutely, because again, if there's land contamination, it will pollute the water course at some point, whether it be into rivers and streams or even into aquifers, but it will have a problem. Whereas when we get the water itself, it's very difficult then to control that, because if it's into rivers and streams, really you have nothing stopping it until it gets to the ocean, and then it pollutes the ocean and everything else. So it's quite an interesting one. I work with a lot of honour students, and I've got some of them just now doing projects on plastic and how that interacts, especially microplastics, and gets into the oceans. But also one of them's looking at waste from abattoirs. And how that should be treated before it goes into the water courses. So a lot of background there as well. And I use a lot of that as I'm going through this type of program, because I do this when I do other ones. So I think bringing in the real world, and that's what I'm hoping you will bring in as well, that you come up with ideas and say, yes, we've done this in the past, it's worked really well, or not. So that's the whole idea of what we're going to do this morning. Okay. Now I'm going to try and bring up the presentation now, hopefully. If it will work, we'll wait and see. So if we do this, share, and can you see that okay? Yep. Yes?
Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I'll do is I'll just go through the presentation, and please, if you have anything at all, because there's only 3 of you there, just unmute your mic and ask a question. So please feel free to do that. If we don't get quite to the end of the presentation in the time we have, don't worry about it. The presentation will go up. The information is there, and what's on there will be enough to guide you. And I'm happy enough, you can email me. My email address is there. If you're unsure of anything in the presentation later on, just drop me an email, and I'm happy to comment on it. Okay, I would rather have a good discussion than just sit here and go through everything without you saying anything. Is that okay? Brilliant. So hopefully now things will work. So what we're going to do today, we're going to look at a wee introduction to it, the role of auditing, some of the types of audits that we do, how we plan, conduct an audit, some of the techniques. Now, some of these you'll know about, some of these you'll do anyway, and quite often in the background, we're always auditing, no matter what we are. We're still auditing things at home, outside, everybody else. We'll do a wee audit exercise, and we'll talk about how you prepare the report. So, I'm going to see if I can move this a wee bit. That's better. Okay, so I've said there, due to the increase in technology, including transportation, and it's quite interesting because you were talking about, for TUI, certainly big infrastructure systems, the pollution created kind of serious consequences on the health, generally the population and the environment. And environmental auditing is one tool that can be used to ensure the quality and sustainable development targets are met. Now, it was yourself, Rebecca, that mentioned things like I'm trying to just get this put in a place that I can see. Okay. You were talking about how people put targets in when they're putting in their applications. And I'm sure it's the same with yourself, Mike. You'll see that, and it's how are they going to do that. So we have to ensure that what they're doing is going to be feasible and actually achievable to be put in place. So what's the role of an auditor, of environmental auditing within that? It's really, as we say, a systematic evaluation to determine whether or not the environmental management system and environmental performance is achieved and conforms to the planning arrangements. And that's a big part, because when you're looking at this, it's the planners. They've given you planning consent to do something. You have to make sure that you're doing it. And as you said, Rebecca, sometimes what they put in is very, very difficult to achieve. You know, when they say things like, we will ensure. Now, that's okay saying that, and that sounds really good, but that's quite an absolute. There's no leeway there. Whereas if, say, we have a thunderstorm or heavy rain or a lot of snow and then we have floods, we could have a problem. Now, if you take sewage systems designed for a certain flow rate, if there is a storm surge, the sewage system bypasses the treatment plant. So the pipe goes straight to the water. Now, that happens. It don't happen very often, but that is there as a backup just in case. And if it does that, because of the flow of water, the dilution is so great that they feel the pollution is reduced. Now, that is how the systems are working. But to say things like, we will ensure, how are you going to ensure that? Because if you have a flash flood, if you have a major event, if you have a landslip, how do you prevent these things from happening? And some of them are out with your control. So again, it's the wording of it. And the planners need to look at that as well, because when they set them out, oh, they're going to ensure, that's really good for me, but it's how then they're putting it in place. So this is the point of the auditing. And it also looks at environmental policy and objectives of the company itself. So why do we audit? We want to look at the management controls and practices, and it's really things like the environment, safety, quality, health. But bear in mind, auditing actually started way back when they were looking at financial audits, or they're looking at audits within hospitals for surgeons and how they've done things. So it's not new. This has been going on for many, many years. For yourselves, do you think of any audits you might actually conduct at home? Not saying write them down, but just think about things at home that you kind of audit.
You need to go shopping.
Yes.
The bills usually.
What have you got in your cupboards?
Yeah. The shop. What did you say there, Mike? Sorry.
The bills usually.
Yes.
How much heating and gas and stuff
I
we
was
use.
going to say bills.
Yeah, that's it. And again, it's one of these things that risk assessments. People think, oh, I've never done a risk assessment before. We do them all the time. You know, before we get out the door, when we're drinking our coffee, is it too warm? You know, all of these things are done in the background. And it's the same with auditing. We do have a bit of knowledge about that. And certainly one of the biggest ones is bills. You look at them, maybe say car insurance comes in. Hold on a minute, I'll look at that last year. I'm checking to see what I paid last year for what I got. They say they're giving me this and it's going to cost me more. I'm going to go somewhere else. The same principle applies all the way through. But for us in business, we're generally looking more at the environmental, safety, quality, health, these kind of issues. And certainly for yourselves, it's more of the environmental side. you'll be looking at because of the type of projects you're in. But again, it's to form to see that you conform with the policies and procedures. So it's only checking. It's not saying you're doing it right. What it's saying is you're doing it in line with what you said you're doing. So I said I'm doing this. Does it show you're doing it? Doesn't mean to say it's right. That's what you've got to prove. If the planning says it's okay and you're complying with the planning consent, then you're happy. Okay, so we're looking at it for that point of view. So some of the types of audits that we can do internally, I did mention financial, stock checks, quality, health and safety, risk management, maintenance, fire. If you work in places where there's an inside building, you'll have fire alarms in it, you'll have fire extinguishers in it, you should have sensors in it, and they'll do generally at least once a year, if not twice a year, an evacuation drill. They audit that, they check it to make sure it's happening. Externally to the company, finance is a big thing, especially if you've got shareholders. Insurance. Why would you audit your insurance company? Well, how much are they charging and what are we getting from it? The customers themselves, sometimes they want to audit you. They'll come in and say, I want to check that you're doing what you say you're doing. The health and safety executive, the Scottish Environment Protection Agency for Scotland or the Environment Agency for England can come in. The planning authorities, and these are the areas that we're looking at, and especially link into the ECAL type of work. So some of the requirements to do this is you're really trying to determine whether or not the environmental management system conforms to the planned arrangements. Okay, so when you look at your planning consent, there are certain things you said you're going to do and you have to do. And all we're trying to do from this is make sure that you're conforming to those planning arrangements. And that's including the requirements for the standards and any conditions, including any consents and planning. What kind of consents could you possibly have, especially for the major infrastructures? What kind of consents do you think I'm talking about?
The implementation of management plans is usually a big one, particularly talking in landscape terms. We often have to implement a landscape and environmental management plan.
Excuse me. Do you work in some of the HS?
I do indeed.
Has been right, because there was actually a very good program or a part of a program at the weekend on about it in the farming program, talking about the issues they're having, and especially through some of the areas for the control of water pollution. So it was a very interesting one to look at that, and also the destruction of habitat.
Yeah.
But things have to be built. We're saying, how do things change and adapt? So it's really good. Can you think of any other kind of consents you might be looking for when you're doing major projects?
Undertakings and insurances.
Yeah, I was actually thinking more of consents to discharge, maybe from your water. So if you've got a lot of water on site, you can't just put it straight into the river. You generally have to treat it some way. You'll put it into maybe a lagoon to get settlement ponds, and then you'll put it out. Or, excuse me, it depends on if there's a lot of traffic on it. You might have some form of interceptor for hydrocarbons. Again, you'll have consent to discharge. So the local authority or SEPA or the EA will say, yes, here's your consent to discharge through the water companies, etc. And they'll say, we'll allow you to discharge X number of cubic meters of material, and this is the condition you have. So they'll tell you the suspended solids in it and any other material that's there, and that's your allowance, and you have to prove that. So these are things that you would audit to make sure that you're doing it right. So and certainly for yourself, Mike or Rebecca, I'm not sure about yourself, Beth, with some of the projects you're on, but have you ever worked with consents from the authorities? Beth, you're nodding your head, yes?
All I do is work on car licenses.
Right, so you know exactly what I mean by that then, what's involved in it? And
we do construction site license. Well, we don't do them, but I sort of advise on how to achieve, construction site licenses in terms of the engineers, but also the permanent works as well.
Yes.
I know that SEPA's just changed their approach to construction site licenses for PPPs.
Yep.
They've dropped. They won't be enforcing against PPPs in future.
That's what that's what I'm saying. Things change all the time, and the biggest problem you have. One of the things I like, and I don't know if you have access to it or not, but there's a thing called NetRegs.
Yeah.
And it's a very good resource. You're nodding your head, so that's good, because what that does for us, it doesn't just give us what's happening now. It kind of tries to tell us what's going to happen in the future. And that's very useful when you're doing planning consents, especially for planning that's going to last, you know, maybe 5 or 6 years. And in some projects, they can be that long, or even if they're going to last 2 or 3 years. Is something likely to change halfway through? So should be looking at that now and then setting up the systems to ensure we're complying with that. So it's all of these things we're looking at. But obviously, we've also got to ensure that whatever system we have in place is properly implemented and maintained. And that really then provides information for the audits, for the management, and for other interested parties. For instance, the local authorities or the environment agencies or the planning authority. So it gives us that backup and proof that we've done things right.
Yeah, and in terms of water and HS2 anyway, I think it's schedule 33 of the hybrid bill. Essentially, obviously HS2 will have impacts on inland waterways and drainage and flood defences and all sorts. So there's a lot of, the Act includes like a range of controls.
It's quite interesting, that one, because when you think about it, you are going through such a diverse range of geology and all the impacts of that, you know, whether the water, you know, if it's clay, it won't penetrate it. But if it's maybe sandstone, that time it'll penetrate it. It'll get into the aquifers. And in some areas, certainly in England, a lot of the drinking water comes from aquifers. So again, we don't want to pollute that. So it's a very interesting one, and in my mind, a very difficult one to ensure it's done right.
Absolutely, yeah. I tend to agree.
And that's where auditing comes in really well, because you can then say, no, we've looked at it, we understand it, we've audited it, and here's the results. So it gives you proof that you've at least looked at it. So that's a good one. And thank you for these comments. I appreciate this. This is what I want as the comments coming in. Okay. So the other requirement is, to order to be comprehensive, the audit procedure should cover the scope, the frequency, the methodology, the responsibilities and requirements for conducting audits and reporting. So you have to have, what are you going to do? How often are you going to do it? And how are you going to do it? And once you've set it up, why is it important to have these things in place? So especially the frequency and the methodology. Why is that important? Especially the methodology. How are you going to conduct the audit?
Well, I find that the most annoying part, because people don't actually think about what they're going to do often in terms of engineering aspects. So if you haven't got your methodology written down, then you're not going to do it. You're off to a bad start, basically. You need a consistent approach, which has got regular, you know, make sure it captures all of what, you know, you're designing for, essentially.
The word you made, you said there was really important, was capture. And if you have the methodology correct, then you're going to capture all the areas that you need to capture. If you don't have a good methodology, then you can't do that. But the other advantage of a good methodology is repeatability. So that if I audit this month and I got to audit in 2 weeks, and another 2 weeks or a month down the line, I'm doing the same methodology, so I can then see whether there's any positive or negative impacts from what happened before. If I don't do that, then how do I know that you're actually complying with anything? In the audit, we might have found that there was an issue with discharges to the local water course. If I don't then have that in the next one, how do I know if you've actually done anything about it? You know, you need to have the same methodology so it's repeatable. Now, it might mean within that, there could be a tick in the box that this is not applicable in this particular area, especially in a linear infrastructure site. But if it's there, at least you know you've looked at it. So that's part of what you're trying to do. And the responsibilities and requirements for conducting the audit, you know, you have to have a set schedule for that. Who's doing it and when they're doing it. Now, personally, when I'm conducting audits, I actually don't tell companies I'm going in to do audits. They always say to me, give me your audit schedule. And I say, well, I'll let you know the morning I come down on the site. Because what I've found in the past is a lot of people used to give out, there'll be the auditors will be in next week or next month. And there's a big scramble to get all the paperwork ready, everything tidied up. If they don't know when you're coming, and bear in mind companies pay me to go in and do this, then they're more likely to keep things up to date because they never know. And in one company where there are 10 different units, we don't necessarily go in and do number 1, number 2. We might do number 1 and number 9, but I might go back in and do number 1 again. And it just keeps them on their toes. And number 5 might not get audited 1 year because I've done everything else. But it really just gets them thinking about, they can come in at any time. So really, why don't we just make the sensible thing and have everything correct or as close as possible? Because when you're auditing, you will find something. no doubt about it. And you'll have some kind of recommendations that, there was an issue here, you need to look at this. But, that's a good thing for a company. It's a really good thing for a company.
I was just going to add something on the methodology.
Yes, please do.
It's also giving confidence to your client. So by putting forward a method early on, it allows them to have that open discussion with you with perhaps things that they would want included in it. And
Yes.
it kind of keeps that, I guess, transparency in what we're going to provide and ensure that the client is happy with that service.
Yes, and that's part of the methodology here, especially for an ECAL, is, it's really relating back mostly to the planning consent, because, that's what they want. Now, if the planners then say, yes, we're happy with this, we'll accept that as your audit, then that's really good, because they might come on and conduct their own audit, but they'll look at it in the same way, given the planning consent. So if you're all doing the same thing, as you say, you're open and transparent, and people understand what you're trying to do and why. And the other thing about having an open and honest and transparent type of methodology is, if you do have an issue, you should be able to identify it a lot easier. And generally speaking, the authorities look favourably upon companies that are doing everything they can, and they maybe just have had a small issue. And even if you find something that's reported, they're usually a lot better for it. Excuse me. Right. Sorry about that. I thought I'd switch my phone off. So again, it's all down to the fact that we want people to understand what we're doing, why we're doing it, and the fact that it's repeatable, they know what you're doing, the results are all there, and it's open. So some of and it was yourself there that mentioned it, in the kind of pre-planning, discuss the arrangements and objectives of the audit program. So you need to talk about it, define the criteria, and we'll go through each of these in a moment or two for some of them. Look at the documentation. Now, if we're looking at the ECAL type of work, what kind of documentation would be the main one we'd be looking at to make sure we get the information we need for the audit?
Planning consents and the project documents.
Yeah, planning consent will be the first one, because we have to ensure we're complying with that. And then we look at the management system within the company, what their objectives are, and then we're following those through. Because as you said, Rebecca, they say one thing, but how are they actually going to do it? So you would say, I'm going to check that we're complying with this. You said you're doing it this way. Are you actually complying to that yourself? We'll develop the team. And generally when you're auditing, when I go out auditing, I'm generally auditing myself, as in I go out myself to do it. And rather than take somebody else with me, I might pick up an expert from the area. So someone that knows that site very, very well, to ask questions and identify issues if I'm not sure what they are. You may be, depending on what you're doing, you may bring in somebody else to work with you that's an expert in a different area. So if you're getting in and doing something to do with fauna, flora, water, air pollution, you might say, well, actually, I could be doing with somebody coming in, especially for air monitoring, to give me more expertise. You might take that as well, depending on the conditions you're in. You also think about what or who to audit. Now, when we talk about who, we're not talking about a person. We're talking about the function that they take, the role that they're in. Because a lot of people tend to try and audit the person, and they can get quite kind of pushed on with, what they're doing. It's their job that you're auditing, what they're doing, their function. Also preparing some documents, so checklists, etc., are very useful. And I'm sure when you're doing auditing or things like that, you'll have a list. You know what you're doing, and that's part of your methodology. It's all there. It's all transparent. The kind of procedures you're going to conduct, how you're going to do it, and also prepare the audit plan for that particular time. Now, in the types of sites that you're working on, especially if you're doing linear projects, you generally have to plan in advance. I need to go and look at this. They're going to be working in that specific area, and there's a risk to the water course, in March. We need to plan our audit for then, because we need to make sure they're doing it right. It could be in other areas where, Beth, you may be going out to do something as a consultant, and you say, right, I'm going out, I've planned it that day, so therefore I'm auditing that day. So you have to arrange and make sure we're getting things right. But when we're looking at the audit objectives, the scope and the criteria, the main thing is, what are we going to use the results of the audit for? Now, if you think about, we talked about, Mike and Beth, we talked about things like your electricity bill coming in, or your gas bill coming in, or your phone bill, right? If we're auditing that, what we're doing that for? We're doing that to ensure that we get information to get the best price possible. But if we're doing an audit on a site, what we're going to use the results for. So what we're going to use these results for. Think about it in the eCal.
Ensuring they're compliant.
Yes, ensuring they're compliant. And that's the most important one that we're trying to do.
But
Rebecca?
we can't ensure they're compliant because it's only the people in control of their works who can ensure that. So it's only the contractor himself who can ensure the compliance. It's just validation of that compliance, whether that's...
Yes, so what we're trying to do is ensure that what they're doing is correct.
Yeah, but in the definition of ensure is to make certain. So it's the person who, in terms of the words ensure, only the person in control of the works can ensure whether they're doing it right. Because if you're doing an audit, we're just validating whether they are or not. So we can't ensure that they are compliant.
No.
We can validate it, but the compliance is by the person who's carrying out the work themselves.
Good stuff. Now, the reason I brought in ensure there is because I mentioned that right at the beginning when we talked about planning consents. When companies say they will ensure.
It's my absolute bugbear. I write constantly on it every single day.
Yes, and that's why I put it in there, because it's not in what I would normally do. But the results are there to confirm. Okay, and that's what we're doing. We're looking at it as a snapshot. Are they doing what they say they're doing in that day, that time, that space? And for most of them, I've said there to ensure compliance with the policy commitments, achieve objectives and targets, and identify opportunities. And one of the things that you find in a lot of companies when you're doing audits, you'll come up and say, you've got, this is wrong, this is what your consent is. And they'll come up and say, oh, I've got a better idea. I know a way of solving this problem. So it's giving them some improvement as well. Although that's not the job of an auditor. The job of an auditor is to audit. Yeah, coming up now. So the other thing is defining the scope. Excuse me. And it's defining the extent, the boundaries of the audit, the physical location, the units, the processes, as well as the period covered. Now that's okay if it's a static location. It's a lot easier to do that. It's a lot harder when you're doing a bigger site. And I've audited some forests where they've been putting in a lot of roads and tracks for things like wind farms. And that's quite interesting when we talk about the boundaries. You're talking about maybe a forest of 5,000 hectares. And that's quite a big boundary to be going through. But what you then bring it down to is what areas am I actually going to be auditing? I'm looking at the roads, I'm looking at the infrastructure for the roads, I'm looking at the bases, that type of thing. So you can narrow it down, and it just makes sure that when somebody else is reading the report, they know exactly what you were doing. Okay? So the criteria is the next one. And again, it's a standard that you'll be judged upon. And that's what you're trying to do. It could be legal performance. If it's consents, that's a legal document. So you have to ensure you cover that. It could be the policy requirements for the company. It could be the management systems, the planning as well. Because the planning consent gives us some of the things we've got to audit against. Anybody like to comment at the moment? Happy enough to move on? Good stuff. So feasibility. You've got to think about the information and planning audit. Look at the cooperation from the auditees, adequate time and resources. If the audit's not feasible, an alternative should be proposed. And the reason I've put a lot of that in is I do quite a lot of forestry work. And the forestry, it was the Forestry Commission actually that was involved in this particular one. And they came out to do an audit. And what they were looking for is the trees, were they planted appropriately? Now when you plant trees, I know this is a digression slightly, but it's the same principle. If you plant trees, they're generally planted either by a turf being turned over or a channel being dug. But with the dig channels, they used to do them right down to the bottom of the hill. The water would flow right off the hill and it would drain out the peat. Now they've got to stop them. So they've got to be a certain distance to stop them so that the water is retained. So when they audit to see that's been done, the audit to see how many trees have been planted, the audit to see if there's any damage. And one of the things that they came out was the gentleman emailed me and said, I'll be down to do the audit today. I was down at the site at 9 o'clock in the morning. He arrived at the site at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And this was in November. Now, this wasn't a big site. It was only about 80 hectares. But there's no way in this earth that he could have walked around part of that site. And I know when you're auditing, you're not going to look at every single tree, but you're going to have an overview of it. And I said, this is not feasible. I thought, we're fine. And I says, no, it's not feasible. And he actually based up into me and said, you're okay. He had a quick look and he said, you're okay, because it was quite a steep hill. He said, no, I can see it all for here. Not happy with it. But these things happen. So if you're not happy with the time, get enough time to do it. Don't have somebody say you've only got 10 minutes or an hour. If you need 2 hours to do your audit, you need 2 hours to do your audit. Okay? Because
I think that's a really good point though, because when I started off doing e-cowing, well, it can be incredibly stressful, and I don't know what these guys' experience is, but you quickly learn that you actually you're the one, if you're carrying out the work, you have to do a review of the documents and what you're being asked to do. So your scope needs to be, you need to be telling people what your scope, rather than the developer or someone else, telling you what your time frame is, because
yes.
that's the tail wagging the dog, where, we started working, one of my earliest sites, we were told we had one day. Essentially, it was a one-day job for a wind farm, and it was incredibly complicated, a really challenging contractor and a really challenging developer. And we just said, you can't do this in one day. The Association of Environmental Clerks of Works has guidance on the fact that how you need to look at the site activities, the proposed infrastructure, all of the, all of those factors into consideration, and then you can plan your works, and your resources and your remit and your scope. And often it's the other way around. I think that's quite an uphill battle, actually, being told how long you've got to do your job. And it's more often that way round than the proper way round, essentially.
Yep. Mike or Beth, do you want to add anything to that? Have you had any experiences? Because I've been the very same as you, Rebecca. That's why I brought that in. It's very difficult to actually get the time you need.
Yeah, particularly if there's any work that needs to be done pre-going to site. I think having the correct allotted time is always good. Just a bit of a digression, really, but in terms of planting near water, there's often permits you have to get to if you want to plant within something like 8 meters of a water course.
Yep.
Although sometimes you can get past that if the need is greater, because you can put sort of traps in place to catch any debris, and it might be that you're planting a tree on an embankment to stabilize it, for example, to combat against erosion or something else.
Yeah,
sorry,
but when I was talking about when I was talking about the trees as well, I was talking about just a normal planting. But even then, when they do the ditches and the drains, they can't run them into anywhere. They have to stop.
They have to stop, yeah.
And the water has to be collected and seep in. So again, that's all part and parcel of it. And that's why when I talked about the time of the audit and the feasibility, I was expecting this person to go and look at some of these, because it had been quite heavy rainfall. And I thought, yeah, you can go and you can see exactly that it's working the way it should be working. Beth, you want to add anything?
I haven't actually had any time constraints, really. I'm obviously really quite new to this, and the project that I'm working on is over quite a long period of time. We get the forecast of 4 weeks of the program, and then we essentially plan our visits around the work that we think we need to audit, essentially.
Good. I mean,
lucky.
Yeah, I was going to say that if you're lucky.
Sounds ideal, yeah.
Yeah, you find though as well that, for instance, when I was talking about where I was doing these different, one company, but different sites within the company, once I had it all set up, it was a lot easier. So the first time I was doing it, taking me quite some time to go through the documentation, get everything ready, make sure I was ready to go on site and do the site visit. Once you've done them, it becomes a bit easier, because you then got in your mind all the things you need to look at. You've already looked at all the documentation, so it makes life easier. But initially, it can take, days to do this. I
was going to say, I had days before my first visit. It's a big project, and there was so many drawings and various different sort of like GCN ponds, and the actual project area is over quite an expansive part of the coast. So it certainly took quite a while to get into it initially.
Yeah, and the other thing that I always tell clients, because generally when we're doing it, we will send out and there'll be a request, and we'll put out our own documentation. But within that, we'll say that we need 5 days to look at this before we even start. We'll need these. So we put out a proposal, and we've got a lot of days in there. Now, if they don't want to do that, that's fine. But if they're paying for it, they might have the time to do it. And we'll look at it and say, generally through experience on different kind of companies, but we know that in some cases it'll take us It could take us 2 or 3 weeks to go through all the documentation, depending on what they're doing. And without that, then really you can't do it, because the other thing about an audit is if anything happens and you've signed your name to an audit to say that at the time you were in there everything was right and you hadn't done your homework, then you could be held accountable for that.
Mm.
And again, that's a major one. And that's why, in my mind, if you don't have enough time, then you have to stand up and recognize it. Very hard to get that at times, but you have to force it through. You have to do the best you can with the time that you need, because if not, chances are you're not going to do the best job you can. You might not feel good about it, but then is the company actually getting the best results? Probably not.
That's probably the hardest. That's probably more difficult than the job itself, because working as a consultant, out with, like, obviously working on the major infrastructure projects, it's less of an issue because I hate to say it, they are a bit of a cash cow, but at my previous job, it was a smaller consultancy, and therefore it's all competitive fees basis, and it's a race to the bottom. And the client will go on a competitive basis. They'll go with the cheapest, and then the cheapest isn't best value for money, and it's a dog eat dog world. And then you end up, basically the client ends up paying for something that can be delivered within that time frame because it was the cheapest one. And I don't know how you fix that problem, because it's the cause of a symptom of a capitalist world.
I think it's a limitation of consultancy is quite often not enough time allocated to do a task,
a job,
or enough sort of budget for the specialist to do it, and somebody less experienced has to come in and do it. So I think that is generally a limitation of consultancy. It's too competitive, and people want the cheapest and the best.
That's why jobs are often priced at a sort of a higher rate, and then you get somebody of a lower price coming in to do the job, like you say, a more junior member of staff.
Yep, I've seen that quite often, where they'll price it as a lead consultant, and they'll maybe, I'm not saying a price, but just say it's £100 a day. I know it's not, but just say it's £100 a day. They'll get the job, but they know they don't have enough time to do it, so they will hire someone else in at £50 a day, and they get twice as much time to do that. And that's what happens, unfortunately, in a lot of cases. The other thing is, though, that one of the things you can do, and a lot of the companies, they do build up a reputation. So even if you are slightly more expensive, they know that they're going to get good results. And maybe you've worked in Scotland, certainly for us, we worked a lot with SEPA, and in Northern Ireland, we worked a lot with the Northern Ireland organisation as well, their environmental section. So we built up a good reputation with them. So the companies are saying, well, I could get them a bit cheaper, but I don't know what kind of reputation they have. Are they working well? Whereas we'd built that up. And again, that comes in with all different types of consultancies, no matter where you are. You do have a reputation. Now, the reputation's one thing, but if the price is far too high, then they're not going to go with it. They're still going to go with someone cheaper. So it's a balancing act. And you're right, Beth, you're never going to get general enough time, but hopefully you'll get enough to do the job right, but maybe not as much as you want. But that's the same in every industry, no matter what you're doing, whether it's auditing, whether you're doing, myself as a lecturer for most of the time. I have my day job as a lecturer. I do this kind of thing. I also do other KTPs. I'm involved in external monitoring of other courses. There's all these different things, and it'd be nice to have more time, but we just don't. We've just got to make the best of what we have. And time management is very important as well. Make things easy for yourself if you can. And that's where things like checklists and documentation comes in. Once you've all that prepared, it does make it a lot easier, as you move on. So you might spend a bit more than you want to the first once or twice you're doing it. If you're back into the same company and you're auditing over a period of time, it does get a bit easier. And again, it's just the planning to make sure you can get that done. Okay, that was interesting. And it's good, Rebecca, that that was a main point, is getting the time to do it. So some of the documents you can look at, checklist, generally for lead auditor, very good. Some of the review checklist as well. So what documents do you think you need to look at? Sometimes you get a questionnaire. Now, it depends on the type of auditing you're doing. If you're working for the same company all the time, do you need to do a pre-audit questionnaire? Well, you should have all the information because you're doing the audit again and again and again, so you're repeating it. But also, sometimes you need to draft interview schedules or inspection schedules, depending on what you're doing. So there's certain parts of sites where, if the work is going on at the moment, so you talk about major infrastructure, if there is a lot of heavy machinery working and they're lifting a bridge into place, for instance, or putting in culverts, you don't want an auditor right close to that. They have to stay back. It's too dangerous. So you might say, well, let's wait till that's finished, and that day you'll get a better chance of seeing everything. So again, setting that up, and again, use it when you're conducting audits, your checklist, your working documents. It's all there as a kind of aid memoir for you, so you know what you're doing and you don't miss anything. Because quite often on sites, you'll see things, you'll tick it off, and then you might see something else that distracts you from it, and you think, whereabouts was I? With the checklist, you know exactly where you are, and you just go back down the list and finish it. So how do we actually conduct it? The way that I generally conduct them, certainly the first time I'm on a site, it's different once you're back on a site, but I'll do a wee tour of the site. Now, whether it's a static business, so it might be maybe a manufacturing plant, or if it's, I've done some with people in railways, we'll still go out and look at part of the site to get a feel for what they're doing and how they're doing it. I'll have a meeting with them to open up. We'll do a site inspection. So depending on what we're auditing, we'll inspect the area of the site that we're auditing. So although I've got a feel for the whole site, I'm not auditing the whole site that day. I might be auditing one part of it. So I see the kind of overall picture, but I'm looking at one specific area, and it might be the consents. So it might be all the discharge or the fuel interceptors or the silt traps, that type of thing. So that's my main part I'll inspect. I'll also interview people. And I think interviewing is a really good way of getting information. I think it's very important because then you know whether they understand what they're meant to be doing or not. And sometimes the questioning you do has an impact on it as well. And I'll talk about that as we move forward. I'll have looked at documentation, but there may be documentation that you need to look at on the day. There may be something that's changed, so you can just look at that to check. And at the end of it all, you'll have a closing meeting. So you'll finish up with the company, depending on whether it's the first time or whether you're in a lot, but generally have some kind of meeting to discuss your findings for that day, and then you'll send in the report after that. Is that the kind of way you normally do your ones? Beth, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, so generally at the moment, once if there's been anything I need to flag, or if I've got any queries about some of the work that I've seen, then I ring the environmental lead of the company that obviously I'm auditing, and then they get the chance to kind of, I guess, explain things or give me any other information. Then my report comes out.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be face to face. It could be, by this or by phone, but at least you've got some kind of meeting to wind it up to make sure that they've understood that.
Yeah.
Rebecca, have you any comments on that?
Yeah, I can think of an example a few years ago when we had sort of it was a subcontracted eke out on a site, and he didn't have, so he did his site work, and things were starting to deteriorate in terms of relationships at site. So in the end, what he started doing was basically not going and finding people at the end of the day, whether it's the agent or whoever. To do was just email them his findings after he'd left, so he wouldn't speak to them, and that really contributed to the downward spiral in terms of dynamics and relationships. So it's just an observation that it's actually really important to have that face-to-face contact.
No, you're absolutely right. Sorry to butt in there, but you're absolutely right. One of the things that I find helps you when you're doing auditing and actually allows the company to, well, a lot of people think auditing is really bad. They think, oh no, the auditors are coming in. Oh no. Whereas actually, if it's done properly, it's of benefit to the company. And I think by having something at the end as a kind of closing out to say, well, look, I found some of these issues, they'll be dealt with just now, and a lot of things can be dealt with very, very quickly. And talking to them, they'll realise there is an issue, or they might actually give an explanation to why that's happened that day. Okay, you might still note it, but yeah, I can see why that's happened. And you're still getting a relationship with them, because if you want to be auditing companies and want to do it well, you have to build up that relationship, to get the feedback that you require.
That's probably one of the most important one is, not annoying them or irritating them, and giving them the chance to sort of explain things. And you don't have to report on absolutely everything you find, because like you say, things can be actioned there and then in the report you can say this was actioned by the foreman or whoever happened to be there.
Yes.
You certainly don't want to be sending emails way after you've been, and that does cause tension. And
I think that makes
you he didn't last to the end of the project.
I was going to say that, sending an email at the end of it, no.
No,
I
he
mean,
was removed from the project actually.
Yeah.
So we
I mean,
took him off.
if there'd been absolutely nothing wrong and it went really well, and I hadn't seen the person, I'll say, look, I'll drop him an email, and I'll just say, went well, no issues. I maybe get away with that once, but I certainly, I do my best when I'm on a site, when I'm finishing, to talk to someone that's, or we should be talking to put over some of the comments, just so we've got a feel for it. Because one of the things about an audit is they should never, in audit report, get anything that they're not expecting, because that can be really detrimental. As you say, you know, if that happens, generally speaking, you're not there. Mike, you want to add something?
Just going back to the interviews whilst on site. I mean, I've had some particularly eager or keen contractors that just sit and talk to you the whole time you're there, you know, with absolutely nothing, and gives you no time to kind of get on with what you're supposed to be doing. How do we? It's a fine balance between sort of pissing them off and telling them you're here to do an actual job.
Yes, it's a difficult one, and sometimes there's a ploy. Sometimes they'll just talk to you.
That's what I mean. Keeping you talking for the sake of it. Yeah.
What you try to do, and what I've done, it's a very difficult one because it really comes down to your own kind of communication skills that you have. But one of the things that's really useful is if they're talking about general things, you say, so how does that fit in with that planning consent of this, or how does that fit into the movement of people over there? And you try and work them into that. So you're actually kind of interviewing them without them really knowing about it. I know it's difficult, but you've got to do that. And sometimes you got to say, look, I'm really sorry, but I've only got another half hour and I need to go and look at this. But it is, you can't just cut people off. And it's a bit like you know, and I know this doesn't relate to the type of thing you're talking about, but it's a similar thing. We have a lot of students and they're all working online just now. We have very few in the university, the same as we're doing with this. And because we also look after the students, we give them a lot of pastoral care. So we get students emailing all the time or want to go on Teams for a chat. You know, it's very difficult to say to them, sorry, I'll only get 5 minutes. You know, you have to wait and see what they're talking about and think, this is really serious, I'm going to take a bit more time, or no, this is not really too bad, I can cut them off in another 5 minutes. And again, it's the same. Well, that's life, you know, let's be honest. And it's not that I'm saying cut them off. It might come in and say, I can't find this. And you think, it's in the system, it's all there for you, you've had it. And you're really kind of say, well, actually, if you look at the document, you'll see it's on page 7. What I'll do is I'll send you the link just now and that will get you through. Okay, thank you, that's it. Whereas other ones will talk about things. But you've got to then be able to wait up and say, is what they're saying important? Actually, can I use some of this? So Mike, when they're talking to you, I can actually use some of this in my audit report because they're actually covering some of the areas. Or actually, no, they're just trying to keep me here. So you then redirect it. And I know you were smiling there, Rebecca, because obviously you've had the same kind of thing.
Well, a common one for eco work when we were working as private, you know, for private developers is that it is known industry at construction sites that people, you know, it's a bit of a staged event when the sometimes when the eco comes, depending on, you know, particularly with the planning monitoring officer. You know, where it's pretty much planned. So what we used to do is if they wanted to take us, so they come down here, let's look down here, and then I knew I'd go, actually I'm going to look over here. And I remember there was one particular time I was on a site up north near Inverness, and a guy literally was trying to lead me down the other way, and I just said, oh, can we just look around this corner? And I was just trying to get a feel for the site. It was I think I only went there once, to be honest. It wasn't a repeat job, basically. It was to do some report for it, but it was incredibly non-compliant site. And yeah, we went around this corner and found this this canalized channel which had created from headward erosion from the works that he'd done, and it was basically a gorge. And what had happened, it removed tons and tons and tons of soil and aggregate down the hill, which was then falling onto the Highland mainline rail. And he basically didn't want us to find it, and it was literally like it had trees falling into it. And he said, oh yeah, that's been like that. Anyway, got to the bottom of it, and he was clearly, obviously wanting us not to see it, and we literally just stumbled across it because he said, I'll take you around this way, and I said, well, let's go around that way then.
Yeah. Can I just say, I've had that numerous times on sites, especially the first time you go into a site. Once you're there and you build up a relationship, you get to see the whole site. But quite often I'll say to them, I'd like a site, an orientation tour, you know, so I walk around the whole site. And they'll say, well, this is what you're here for. I said, no, I want to see the whole site. Give me a kind of overview of the whole site. And I was in one, the very same thing. It was maybe about the second time I was down at the site. And I went in and he said, yeah, we'll go around this way. And I thought, this is an unusual way to get around to the back of the site. I said, no, let's go up round by the weighbridge and get around that way. And it was like, okay. And I knew right away. And what had happened was they had a spillage of waste material. A lorry had actually overturned as it went round the corner. It went too fast. It shouldn't have done it. It wasn't the company's fault. It was the driver's fault. But it spilled over and they were starting to clear it up. But they hadn't put enough barriers in, so some of the material was getting into the drainage system. And they didn't want me to see that. And I said, no, let's see it. But more importantly, how are you dealing with it? So it wasn't the fact that it happened, it's how are you dealing with it? And what they didn't have at that time was drain covers. So they bought some drain covers, which made a big difference. And they bought the kind of sausages you get to absorb it. And that's all they did. They bought one of these kits. Because that was a bad bit of the design of the layout of this site, they put a kit outside at the corner and they trained people how to use it. Now, it never happened again, thankfully, but at least they had that kit there. I says, if we hadn't went round there to look at that, chances are you wouldn't have put that in place. So I says, it's very important. So yes, absolutely. Don't just go where they take you. Go and look at other things if you can. And it's a major one for anybody that's doing auditing. Okay.
Yeah, I think just a final thing on communication is don't always pick up on the bad things. So do tell them the positives that they're doing too, because then actually people do want to talk to you. Otherwise, they see you coming and hide.
One of the things, and it's near the end, and I don't mind this because we're getting on with the time. But one of the things that I always say to people when you're doing the report is highlight all the good practice first. This is a really good site, you're doing all of this. However, there's one or two minor issues you need to deal with. And then you list them. And right away, they're feeling, yeah, we're doing a lot good. And that actually relates, although we're talking about eCal work and auditing and environmental sites, it's the same principle whether you're doing it in environment or even safety. Because one of the things in safety now is they're changing how they think about safety. And I don't know if anybody's involved in any types of the safety aspects of the sites. But one of the things we're looking at in safety now is rather than saying, you're doing all this wrong, what they're saying is, you're doing all this right. How can we then ensure that bits that are wrong are brought up to the same standard? So rather than focus on what's wrong, they're focusing on what's right. And that's what I try to do with audits. Focus on what's good, and then say to me one or two issues we need to deal with. And you can use some of the information you've learnt from the good parts to bring up the parts that are not as well, that are failing. Just look at it that way. So it's a change in attitude. But yes, very important, Beth, is praise them for what they're doing.
That's what I call a good shit, good sandwich.
Yes, absolutely. but that's what you've got to do. That's what you've got to do.
Do it all the time.
So I'm going to give you a couple of photographs now of some of the things I actually found on sites. So walking around the site, one of the sites, the bottom one in the middle there, they said, we don't need to get around the back today. I says, yes, we do. And went round, that's what I found. Now, you can see the tin there's got a flammable sign on it. So the paints are all flammable. There's material lying about. What had happened was that all that material was used to create a temporary spray booth. So they'd put these bits of steel up, supported them, covered them all over. The cloth that you see lying there was used to cover it so they could spray. And it was because they had beams outside that were too big for the spray booth. So they just put them on this. They actually had rollers on them, and they just rolled them through and sprayed them as they went by. Not ideal, not the way to do it. Emissions to atmosphere and everything else, but that's what they're doing. From that, they were told, no, you can't do that. Big issue, especially with the water there, because the water then seeps into the groundwater. You have a lot of old material lying about. There's a lot of steel, cardboard containers. They actually put in a complete new spray booth because this was a one-off, they said. I said, well, no, if you think about how you're manufacturing, you're trying to get more work in this type of area. You have to prove to them. If they come onto site, if they ask me to audit your system, I would say, no, don't go there. They can't do the job properly. I said, so you've got to think about that. So they put in a new spray booth, and actually they increased production drastically because of that, because they actually could show people, we've done all this. So although it was a hiccup, it shouldn't have happened, it led on to something better for the company. But if I hadn't went round the back, again, I wouldn't have noticed that. one on the left-hand side there, it's just a water valve. That's actually, although it's hard to see the side of it there, that was a 9-inch pipe that it was on. So you can imagine the amount of water that's running out of that. And I said, you know, you're paying for your water coming in. Yeah, but there's not much of a leak. I said, but surprised how much that leaks. I said, and also it's not paying for the water coming in. You're also paying for the sewage going out, because your sewage is determined by the amount of material coming in. So again, we're auditing for water use. It was water and waste we're looking at that day. And I said, you know, not good. And in the right-hand photograph there, that's where they were keeping their old oil. So that was engine oil. They said it's all controlled. There's a bund there where you can see what happened to their bund. And the bund really is not going to do anything. That might be okay if it was a good solid bund and it was only for the barrels. But when you look at the blue container, it was full of waste oil. If that leaked or burst, that bund's not going to do anything. So again, they changed it. And what they put in for the oil was a double-skinned fuel tank. So the type you use in sites. And I said, that's absolutely fine. It's double-skinned, no problem. And they didn't need a bund round it. So it was a lot easier for them. So again, it's just by looking at things, highlighting areas. And most people want to do the right thing. You know, they really do, because they don't want to be prosecuted and all the impacts of that, you know, the reputational damage, especially for big organisations. They don't want that. So having a good site inspection is very, very useful. And the kind of things you're trying to do is look at process effluent. So what's coming out? Now, in most sites, generally speaking, you're only talking about water. If it's like the linear ones, like road constructions or railways. But you'll also have all the facilities. So you've got the management facilities. So you've got maybe the canteens, the toilets, the shower blocks, depending on the type of process you're doing. If it's wind farms, certainly they'll have that type of thing. Where's that waste going? Is that going into the local water course? Is it going through a septic tank, or is it just a holding tank and taken off site? What kind of solid waste do you have? Plastics, paper, cardboard. Is there any chemical waste? Is there any fugitive emissions? Is there any emissions from the site at all? Now, in construction sites, you've got a lot of diggers. All of these things put out emissions. What kind of practices do you have in place? The general site conditions, is it clean? Is it tidy? You know, given the fact it's a construction site, it can still be reasonably clean and tidy. What kind of safety provisions are in place as well? And for me, that's very important when you're recognising the site. And the safety provisions, I'm not talking about what they are doing for their staff. It's what they're doing for you. You know, and making it safe for you. Have you had an induction? Have they been sure you've got your steel toe cap boots on, for instance? Or have you got a high-vis jacket on? Have you a hard hat? You know, what safety provisions are there for you as an auditor? You know, that all has to be taken into consideration. And some of the techniques.
Good one. I was just going to say, because normally you can tell a site what sort of type of site it is just by the cleanliness and the tidiness of it, and also particularly litter. Like you can pretty much take, if you've got, I guess, a reasonable experience, you can take a judgment within a few moments of being at site. Just even, I'm very opinionated about litter. So if there's litter lying around, I just think, well, this clearly isn't going to be a very good site.
I've got to say I'm a bit the same, because I don't see any excuse for litter of any kind. And one of my big bugbears, I do quite a lot of hill walking and a lot of other areas in the forestry, because I'm involved in forestry quite a bit. And one of the things that I find very distasteful, shall we say, is litter.
Yeah.
And I was actually looking at a forest that had been planted, and it wasn't massive, and I was going around it with a quad bike, because that was the only way you could get the whole site. And because of the way it was laid out, you know, you can up and down and you could see everything from each side and walk in. And I found for the people that were doing the work, there was cans of Red Bull, Coca-Cola, plastic bottles, wrappers for crisp packets and all sorts lying about. And bear in mind, these companies are paid on the completion of the task. And I actually said to the people that were paying them, I said, this time you can't do anything about it because the contract doesn't state that. But I said, see, the next time you're doing a contract with them, have that in there as a procedure they must do, is clean the site before they leave. And if they haven't done it, you take so much off them. I said, I guarantee.
That's just bone idleness, like, you know.
Yes,
and it's so common.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's individual items of litter.
Yes.
You know, on sites you can often get, you know, barrels of things strewn around, and like the paint cans and so on that you found. That's all litter itself, you know.
But what annoys me is that they've carried a full can of cola or Red Bull or whatever it might be, packets of crisps and the things. They'll empty it and makes it really light, and then they throw it away rather than taking it home with them. I find it very, very difficult to understand.
Yeah, it's a cultural thing.
Yeah, and I walk the West Highland Way, and I see it there all the time. I'm thinking, this is a really nice place to be. Why are you making such a mess of it? So yes, litter is one of my bugbears, and I will tell people about it. And quite often, though, you'll get some colourful language back from people. What's it got to do with you? Is a very nice way of putting what they say to you at times, but I don't care. I don't see why we should be lifting up other people's litter. So again, it is a big problem. Big problem.
Going back to your previous slide, just really quickly, doing your due diligence, understanding what materials are on site, and is a really big thing. Because often you'll get sort of junior members of staff going to site not understanding the ramifications of chemical elements or whatever else. So it's an important thing.
Yeah, and that's part and parcel of the time you need to actually go through the documentation. What are they using? Where are they using it? I mean, I've had people on site. I was actually taking a class and we're doing some auditing, and it was in a waste management company. And I said to some of them, right, you go in and interview some of the drivers. And they come back and they said they know nothing, they're useless, not good. So I said, well, explain to me how you've actually asked them the question, because that's important as well. It's how you communicate these things as well. And one of the things they said was one of the girls who didn't have any experience really in auditing on that kind of site didn't take the time to understand it. And talking to the driver, she said, could you explain to me your responsibilities under the environmental management system in place? Now, the driver just looked at her and went, I haven't a pen. Now you think, whoa. So I went up to him and says, excuse me, mate, what happens if you spill something? Well, he says, I've got to fill in this form, I've got to fill in that form, I've got to give it to this person, I've got to put it into the bag, I've got stuff there for it. He knew exactly what to do. No issue at all. Really good. But in his terminology. And again, that's important about communication. It's getting it right for the right person. I then sent him in to see the managing director of the company. And, again, it's different. They do, or they should know their responsibilities under the system. They've got a higher level. But further down, you've got to try and adapt how you do things. And again, that's because the knowledge, they've got to gain that knowledge. But you can't send them onto a site. They were going into another area, and I said, you can't get in there. I says, they're using chemicals. Yeah, but I can ask. I said, but you don't know anything about them. You're not a chemist. You have no idea. I says, you could be walking in there and there's fumes. You don't know if they're released. I says, you need to find out what they're doing. Who on this site does that? So there was a chap in charge of that site. We brought him out. So, right, what are you doing in here? How are you doing it? What if? Is there monitors? Yeah, there's monitors there for any gas. There's no leaks just now. This is what's stored in here. We've got neutralising agents for certain things because you store different chemicals in different places. Great, they had it all there. But you can't just walk in. And I think that's what you're meaning, Mike. You have to understand what you're doing. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. If it's okay, we'll just move on. Yes. So the kind of techniques, depends on the techniques you have. As I said earlier on, you're not auditing the person, it's the job, the function they do. And again, look at the current state of the company's compliance against the performance. Generally speaking, even if you're in as an auditor, they've had audits before from someone. It's good to look at those to get a feel for how they're doing and how they're moving forward. So I'm quickly going through some of the techniques, but I'm quite sure you understand these. If you want to ask any questions, please do. But the one thing that I've always been very keen on is use closed questions very sparingly. Get people to talk. And the one thing about an interview is if you're talking to someone and they start answering you and you don't answer back right away, chances are they'll keep talking. They think, oh, there's something else to say. I said use the open questions, be patient, be good, or take good legible notes. And one of the things that's really good, if there's two of you there, somebody can ask the questions and somebody can take the notes, because you're then concentrating as if you're asking questions on what the answers are, whereas the person taking the notes just writes them down. So it's really useful. And the interview person should be thanked for the cooperation. Absolutely, the end of it. Thank you very much. One of the things I find, though, and it really, I thought it was what you were mentioning earlier on, Mike, but I've been in sites where you'll go in and you'll maybe mention to someone, well, you could be doing this better. You know, you're not quite complying with it. And they'll come up and say, me? You want to see what Fraser's doing down the street there? You know, he's done this, this, and this. And I think, okay, thank you very much. That's really, really useful. But sometimes I'll do that. I don't know if you've had that experience or not. But the more audits you do, you generally find somebody will say, oh, you think I'm bad? What about? And I'd say, I don't know if you've had it, but it's quite interesting when they do that. It gives you a wee smile in your face. So some of the typical environmental issues, and I'm just going to go through some of these to give you some of the things that you'll see and some of the issues that you've got to comply with. So when we talk about dust, dust is a big thing in a lot of sites, especially in the summer months. Although certainly in Scotland, we've not had that many summer months to have nice weather. But dust in quarries, road construction, any type of construction, housing schemes, it's all there. So it's how do we prevent that dust? And one of the biggest things is, you know, we can use a bowser to damp it down. We can use spray, wheel washes, that type of thing. But one of the biggest things is to get the roads in early. Even if they're not tar macadam, if they're hardcore, it tends to stop the dust. That's really, really useful. And if we have to, and if it is a tarred road, even if it's just a base coat of tar, at least using a road brush can take a lot of the dust and reduce the impact. But even on sites, you've got small scale. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen this type of equipment for cutting. A lot of them use them and they create a lot of dust. But you can use suppression either from a hose or from the canister in the middle there. And again, it's very simple to do. It just stops the dust getting into the atmosphere. And generally, if you're working on a site, you can clean up that site. Because if you don't, the dust can then drift and it can maybe go into the top of water, which is straight into the water course. So very simple, but it's quite hard to get some people to do this because, as you mentioned, Rebecca, sometimes it's the person doing the job and they might say, oh, I'm not going to go and fill that with water. I'm down the bottom of the yard. I'll just leave it. Nobody will notice. And I've actually seen them locally where they were putting a new roof in one of the houses around where I stay. And there was a V-neck on the roof. So it's just, you know, a V channel. And they actually did one of these up on the roof. And they were sawing the tiles on the roof. No suppression. And the whole roof was covered. And all the garden that was next to it was covered. You know, and they thought this was okay. And I actually said, you can not affecting me. I said, it's nothing to do with you. It's everybody else as well. So it's really difficult, but these are things we've got to think about. In building sites, generally, though, these are done right because somebody should be overseeing it. If we think about things like mortar silos, so people are coming in and out, generally with dumpers and things like that to collect the mortar and take it in. This is just a site where you can see it's all muddy. There's a lot of mortar has been spilled. You can see it in the kind of bottom right-hand corner. And again, not good. And if I'd seen that in site, which, well, I did do, not happy with it. And I think, Rebecca, if you've seen this as a starter, it'd be like, not happy. Again, clean up required. But the thing is, you can do it really well. And this is one I done, Level, sorry. What a difference. Doing the same task. You know, you see they've got the mortar silos there. It's all hardcore. They've got it fenced off. You know, it's really, really good. Neat, tidy, easy to look after. Now, when you go into a site like that, you think they're at least trying to do their best. They're at least trying to get it right. Even in the front of the photograph there, you can see all the windows. They're all stacked. They're supported. They're not lying about. Because the company realised that they were wasting an awful lot of material. They were spending a lot of time cleaning up when they didn't have to. And I thought, why are we wasting that money? Because it's money. You know, it's profit. Shareholders are thinking, why are we just getting rid of this? So they made a conscious effort to do this. And I've got to say, you know, it's really good. Really well done. But you also get things like this. And this is a container with diesel in it. And you can see quite obviously it's spilled. It's leaking into the ground. The only consolation I had there was it's clay soil, so it's not going to penetrate that well. But how do you clean that up? You've got to dig it up. You can't just leave it. You've got to absorb it and then probably take away the contaminated soil. No need for that. You can do things a lot better. But that then leads to diffused pollution. Okay. And again, you can see that into a stream or a river. And that's what happened with that when some of it did trickle away and get into an area where it got into the watercourse. So they were done for that. However, this is one of the diesel storage tanks. And this is the type of tank I was talking about that the company that I showed you earlier on put in place for the waste oil. It's double skinned. No problem at all. No issues. And for this one, it's got a spill kit next to it just in case. More so for the people filling the vehicles rather than the tank itself, and the fire extinguisher is there just in case there's a problem. Okay? But very simple to do. It's in hard standing, no issue. If there is a spill, then clean it up. And that's the kind of thing you'll be looking at when you're doing your audit as well, depending on the site you're in and what area you're auditing.
I'd say one thing about spill kits is that it's useful to ask people how they use them, because there are sites where you have spill kits, but people aren't trained how to use them. So if something happens, they're just kind of like rifling through them.
All right, I find that interesting.
So having a spill kit and training the people how to use them.
Yes, and you've got to train them. And actually, one of the things that when I was doing one of my jobs, the company said to me, "What do you recommend we do?" And I said, "Actually, it'd be very useful to see if they can use a spill kit." They went, "Well, how do we do that?" I says, "Well, we need to use something that's got a colour in it that's similar to the colour of something on the site, but that won't do any environmental damage, because when we put it down, it's likely into the water." Mm-hmm. So we came up with a very, very fine solution of water-based paint. And it was a blue water-based paint. And when we diluted it, it came right down to the colour of one of the materials we were using. So I said to one of the chaps, go up to where they store it and just empty the bucket and see what happens. Because they'd all been trained to use spill kits.
Mm.
Empty the bucket. And initially it was, oh, there's a spill. And it was like silence for maybe a minute. And then somebody says, well, I'm not going to say the word they used, but he made a comment and says, we need to sort this. And then it just went and they'd done it right. But it was because they'd never experienced an actual spill. In the training, it was, right, here's a spill, how do you deal with it? And it was just water. When they see something, it's like, oh, what do we do? Now, the first thing I heard one of them saying was, it's okay. There's no fumes or anything from this. And it was an inert material. So it wasn't going to cause them really any harm. And they knew exactly what to do, but they put the gloves on, they put the stuff on, done it all right, and they contained it. And then once they'd done that, we went in and said, actually, that was just a test. But it's when you do it for real in that kind of situation, you really see how people react. It's like if you're doing a fire evacuation. Well, here we go. It's a fire evacuation. It's okay. I know it is, because if you look outside, you'll see the people down where they're waiting you to get out. The best ones are, and I do this for another company where I do their health and safety. I'll go in. I've got one of the keys for the wee press points. You can put a key in and take it. I'll walk in. They won't see me. I'll turn the key, set the alarm off, and see what happens. Because the first thing is, the person's normally out the office, it sets them off. He's still in the office. And it's like, how do they react? Maybe it is real. So again, you're right. If they're going to get spill kits, they have to be trained to use them. And that can be part of your audit. And just by interviewing people. So you've got a spill kit. Do you know how to use it? No, I've not been trained. Okay, fine. We'll get that sorted. So very, very useful. When we're looking at things like silt, again, you can leave the drain open. It goes in. Now, the problem with silt in the stormwater drains is when it goes in, there is a small area in that drain that will take some of the silt. But if it's going in an awful lot, it will go straight into the water course. And generally speaking, stormwater drains don't go into the sewage system. Certainly new builds, they should be, because you combine systems in the old system, but they should be a full water system and a stormwater system in new builds. And if you don't put something in there, it can get into the water course. And if you get brown water into the water course, people are not happy. So just a bit of Terram in there catches out the silt. It's just a filter, a pre-filter. Very simple to do, but people have to understand why they're doing it. This is one of my other kind of bugbears on any site. And although this is a building site, it could happen in any site, whether you're doing, roads, railways, whatever it might be, is materials left lying about. You pay for them, you bring them on site, and then you don't look after them. It doesn't make sense. It's a waste of money. And it's down to people's views and opinions and their own thoughts on, it's not mine, I can do what I like with it. And again, by interviewing people, you find out more about this. But this is one where the pallet, he hadn't taken his time, he went too fast, the bottom, it split. He's now got to take the time to rebuild them in another pallet to move forward. Now, if you notice, the way they come is they're stacked vertical for blocks, because it allows them to drain a lot easier. He's putting them flat, so they'll retain the moisture a lot more. So they won't be actually as good to work with. So that is another knock-on effect of that the builders, when they take them on, have to work with them in a lot more. Maybe the moisture in the mortar has to be different because of the way that they're stacked. Again, waste of time and effort. if you think about stacking them, one of the good things that companies do, and this is quite a good site, they build the base for the house first, and then they stack the material on it, so at least it's got hard standing, and they've got plastic sheets over it to try and protect it. But if you see there, though, there's a lot of plastic connections. You see them all for the pipes lying about. Again, not too bad. They're all the grey, the brown pipes. That's just a normal stormwater pipes for a house. Do you see them there, Rebecca?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Again, a lot of money in these things, and they're just left lying about. So they've stored what they perceive to be the high value products, but some of the lower value products, according to them, are just left lying about. And the thing about that is that a lot of building sites, you'll find that the people who work in the building sites have really good houses with really good drainage systems and good windows and a lot of other things in them. I was on a site that a friend was looking after, and he said, "You want to see this site?" Went back down. This was last year, and the kitchen fitters went in one day, fitted 4 kitchens. Went in the next day, the 4 kitchens were no longer there. People in the building site thought, "Great, all the workers went in, take them back out, take them away, stole them." They didn't realise they were in camera, and they were all prosecuted, but that's what they'd done. These are really nice kitchens because they were high value properties. These properties were selling for over £400,000 each. So you can imagine the quality of the kitchens, and they were all stolen in one night.
Out by a contractor, another contractor?
No, not by the contractor, by another contractor. Not the people who installed it, by someone else.
Yeah, but another contractor at the site?
Yes. Somebody on the site thought, "Oh, yeah, beauty, we'll take these."
Well, that's just outright criminal, isn't it?
Yes, well, they were prosecuted for it, and the kind of head person went to jail. But, it happens. And again, that's why it's really good on certain sites, especially with this type of thing, to have cameras, for instance, or even a guard. There was no guard on site at night. So when people had made a locked the gate and that was it. But every contractor had their own key to in and out. So, but thankfully the camera picked them up, or they wouldn't have got it. They wouldn't have known who'd done it. So it does happen. So it's really useful doing that. And one of the things that's really interesting on certainly engineering sites is if what you're using is dull, people don't tend to steal it. If it's shiny, they tend to steal it. I don't know why. It's like magpies, they'll pick up something that's shiny, but that happens. The other thing is noise. And again, in some sites, so generators, and I'm quite sure, certainly for yourself, Mike and Rebecca, on your sites, you'll have generators, I would imagine so. Maybe not so much yourself, Beth, it depends on the sites you're looking at, but generators, they're on quite a lot, they're quite noisy, and again, there'll be a barrier around them to try and reduce that noise impact. But again, it's where you locate them, but the location then has an impact on where the cables have to go. So if you've got cables to run to where the use is going to be, whether it's been a canteen area or whether it's quite often now they use like containers that can stack on top of each other as offices. So all of that has to be looked after. And again, when's the site on and off? Is it working all the time? It might be that it can't work all the time because the proximity of where it is to different areas. So I would imagine if you're talking about roads and railways, there'll be areas when you're passing right next to residential areas, rather than just out in the countryside. And again, you'll probably have to put different procedures in place on the hours you work or the type of noise you produce, or that is all got to be written in because that can have an impact on the local people. So again, these things have all got to be looked at. And generally speaking, if they're in some type of planning consent, they then have to be monitored and audited.
We generally deal with noise mostly for things like otters out in rural parts of Scotland. So some of the wildlife is actually quite sensitive, but particularly you get planning conditions of noises and otters, and can't think what else, but I'm sure there are other mammals that basically are the sensitive receptor.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of things in there, and there's things like there was a very famous case near Livingston, and it was to do with the big Euro depot that's up there. And it's not quite in the site where it was meant to be because they found was it the red-crested newt. There was some type of newt that they found on the site, and they had to build this pond and everything else, and then that meant they had to actually change the location. They done all that, and it was after that they realised that someone had actually picked up this newt from somewhere else, brought it and actually put it on that site. One of the people that objected to the site, but because the survey was done and they found it on the site, had to be done. And that's I forget where that's written up, but that was an actual thing that happened. Now things are a lot different now. I mean, that was
That's where SEPA are. That's SEPA's main headquarters.
Well, I'm not sure if that's exactly where it is, but it's in that area. It's to do with the big depot that's up there, and they had to put a big pond in for the newts and everything else, and they done all that, and then they realised. I think they're actually still, if I remember rightly, the last time I looked, there was still a population of newts there now because all the facilities are there for them, but technically they were not there initially, and it was the people that protested to this, and you've got to understand, and I'm sure you're seeing it in some of the things you're doing. There is people who protest, and they'll go to extreme lengths to protest. So shifting a wee newt is nothing, but you know, if you find it there, it's we can't do anything. But things have changed. Things have changed. Right. I'm afraid we're actually just a bit out of time because I had an hour and a half with you. I think we're about 27 minutes past. Would that be about right? What was actually going to get you to do next was actually to do a wee bit of an audit exercise on your own areas. And it was really just to look at some of the major issues that you have and things that you think should be audited. So you can actually do that if you want to at some point. And the only other thing I was going to talk about was the reports themselves. So I'm going to quickly go over the report with you. But the whole idea of the report is you'd have the closing meeting, and it was mentioned you would have to talk to people first, let them know. You would write the formal report, and you would send that in to the relevant people. But hopefully there's nothing in the formal report that you send in that they're not expecting. And that's very important because you don't get any surprises. But then also having a chance to come back to you and say, well, yes, but we did discuss this and we said we're putting this in place and you haven't put that there. Okay. Now, you might have some issues that's got to be closed off. So technically, the whole audit is not finished until the last item has been ticked off. You know, and that's when it's finished. And the other thing that I was going to say was that I get back in quite regularly to audit companies. And if they've not done any of the actions from the previous audit, I will not audit them again. I will just say that they failed to do all of this. Therefore, what's the point of auditing them? You only need to do that once, and you generally get quite a response, maybe not from the people at the shop floor, but from senior management. They get really quite annoyed that nothing has been done because they're spending the money to get the auditors in. They're paying for that and expect something from it. And if nothing's done, then they get quite annoyed. That's really all I've got to say. I know it's been quite a quick run through, but it's been really interesting. And can I say before I go any further, thank you very much for your contribution because it makes it a lot better. It makes it real. And it was interesting that a lot of the things that you were saying are things I've encountered in the past or I still encounter. So it's really nice to see in one sort of way, these issues are still there. Okay. So yeah, I know that sounds quite bad, but you understand what I mean by that.
Yeah.
It's still an issue, and it's still the same. It's still trying to get people to understand why you're doing the audits. It's still trying to get them to give you enough time to do them properly, and then for them to take on board what you've actually written in your audit to take it forward to try and hopefully make things better. Because that's all we're there for. We're not there to try and catch them out. We're just there to help them to make sure that they're doing what they say they're doing. Okay. Is there any kind of final things you would like to say or comment on, or did you find that?
Are these slides going to be made available?
Yes, I'll put all these slides up. The only thing I'll say to you about the slides, I'll put them up, but please don't share them with anyone else. And the reason for that is a lot of the photographs are my own photographs, but they're also photographs I've been allowed to use to teach. And that's okay, but then if we share them out elsewhere, then there's a copyright issue. So please, if you don't mind, they'll be up there, but use them for your own benefit only.
Yeah, no problem.
I hope you understand that. It's not that I don't want to give you them, it's just that we can't share them because, like, so this one's got a plant on it. They said to me, yes, that's fine, but we can't really publicise that anywhere else. And it'll be a bunch of the consent we've got. Okay. Yeah. But I hope you found it of some interest. Certainly for me, it's been interesting to get the feedback of what's happening in different areas and the things we're finding, which just kind of focus my point that these things are still happening. And we need time, we need effort, we need to do it right.
Thank you very much.
If there's nothing else, can I just say thank you very much for your time? I really appreciate it. I'll put a small exercise up for you to do. I say you'll look at the rest of the notes, but I'll put the exercise up just to really highlight some of the issues within your own sites, and hopefully I'll get that up for tomorrow.
Cool.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Brilliant.
Thank you for your time. Speak to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.